All right, good. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the panel about making, getting ideas to happen. I'm sure that all of our heads are always, all the time, full of any ideas. But realistically, how many of those actually turn into a game? I got three people here who had some wonderful game ideas. And first of all, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Jodie Azhar, and I'm the lead technical artist on Total War at Creative Assembly. So a large part of my job is working with our art teams across all our Total War games to help them realise their artistic vision in the game.
Hi, I'm Innes McKendrick, and I'm a programmer at Hello Games. I've been there for about 6 years, so right through working on No Man's Sky right till this day. So I focus on tech stuff, procedural generation, but also how the company comes together as a team. And I work on a bunch of indie stuff in my own time as well.
Hello, my name is Elena Santos. I founded my own company called Modern Dream. We made titles like LA Cops for consoles and Steam, and our latest game was Dragon Pod for mobile. And I recently joined Lockwood Publishing as a technical manager in our new studio in Leamington Spa to join the very talented team in Nottingham to work on a very successful game called Advocate Life.
All right, and my name is Martina Spans. I'm a mobile game publisher, and with Tamalaki Games, we focus on hidden object games, match 3, time management. And on the other side, my partner company, FGL, focus on runners, clickers, and RPGs. Right, ideas. So thinking back of the latest game project that you worked on, or the one that you're working on now, basically how did that idea happen, and was the original idea for the game much different than what it's turning out to be? Who'd like to start on this one?
I can start. I mean, in our latest game, it was as I mentioned, it was a small sort of procedural mini golf game, and that was the basic idea. It was going to be as small as, say, Crossy Roads even, and suddenly a year and a half later, and it's something completely different. So we had, I think, any game really progresses with the team and how well the team works together. And any idea is no bad idea, right? However, you have to put the game out there and really try it out and see what the players, think of it, I guess.
So on No Man's Sky, that's obviously quite a long project. And I would say that there's so much that's true to the game now, even post-release, even working on things that we never expected to, that's really true to the core idea of the game. And that's that you have something that's relaxing, where you explore this procedurally generated universe. But that's kind of misleading to say as well, because there are so many little ideas that sprung up along the way that no one could have predicted. So it's kind of like the idea stayed really true to the vision that people had really early on, but it's not like there was a roadmap for everything that we were ever going to do. It's not like I could have told you even, whether we'd be working on updates. I wouldn't have known that as a developer, or what would be in them or anything like that, or where the game would be today. So I think it's about having that core idea and iterating on it.
Yeah, we're an interesting example because we've been working on an IP that's about 17, maybe 18 years old now. So each of our game titles for Total War, we have to think about what interesting theme or topic do we want to make and what will our fans enjoy. So we do a lot of historical games. So we sometimes take an era in history that we've done before. So we've done Rome and then made Rome 2 years later. And we've also tried to do new eras that we haven't done before at all. So our next title will be Total War 3 Kingdoms, so going back to ancient China. And then our last released game, we've got a trilogy of Total War Warhammer games, so that's working with an IP holder. So as a team, we want to think about what new, fresh ideas we can bring to each of our titles, but are still within scope. We want to make each title bigger and better, but we still have to release and not get carried away, because at the core of our games we have a fan base, and we want to build on that fan base with each game, and we don't want to completely redesign how we are doing strategy games with each title.
So kind of about the IP that you just talked about, that's also, I think it's quite interesting because you worked with, of course, you have your own IP that, like you said, you built up during the last 17 years, but next to that, Aliens, Warhammer. What's it like to work with such IPs? Does it kind of limit you, or does it give a good direction?
I think there's pros and cons to it, and the main thing to remember is it's a relationship. Both sides want to release a really good game, but you'll have different priorities. As a developer, you're thinking about the games and the mechanics, and especially working with Games Workshop, they have a really good idea of game balancing. They've made the tabletop game, but they might not have the technical understanding of how that translates into a video game. And different relationships work differently. So with Alien Isolation that our console team made, the IP holder was Fox, but it went through Sega, who had the license for making Alien games at that time. And we're a Sega studio, so our relationship is very close, and you can get good feedback sort of very regularly. On other titles such as Halo Wars 2, we were working with Microsoft and 343 Studios. So they're very much invested. It's their IP, it's their game, and we're the ones making it. So they want to ensure that everything is as good as possible, that we're going to release a really good game. And they're putting trust in us as a developer. Working with Games Workshop, again, a very different relationship, but it was very good. And all of these relationships depend on trust. If the publisher or the IP holder trusts you to do a really good job, they will give you a lot more freedom. So it's about showing them the ideas that you have and being upfront and letting them know what is and isn't technically possible. There's no point telling them that you're going to deliver the stars and the moon if within the budget that you have and they're willing to pay, and the agreement that you've come up with between you, if you can't deliver that, then your relationship breaks down very quickly. So really, it's trying not to think about it too much as a them and you. It's you are two entities that are in a relationship to make one game together.
And kind of going back to sort of the complete world of creative freedom, I was thinking back of a story I heard of Vuga, where they said, within the company we might have 1,000 ideas, and 100 of those actually, we prototype them, and of those, 10 we put them out as beta games, and one actually sort of makes it. I'm not sure if those were the exact numbers, but that was kind of like the funnel they go through. At your studios, do you have a similar sort of funnel or kind of process that you work around it?
Yeah, so I think probably almost every studio has an infinite number of ideas. Not having enough ideas, in the history of game development, no company has ever had that problem. So you have to have a way of cutting those down and choosing the good ones. I think that I really value about where I work is that we don't have a lot of ego in ideas. So if I propose something, but someone else proposes something better, I don't feel any personal pressure to push for the thing I suggested just because I did, to further my career or anything like that. And I think that's so important in getting the best ideas out, that I can commit fully behind something someone else said just because it's better for the game or better for players or better for development, whether that's a tech thing or a design thing, and not have to worry about the consequences of that.
I think from an indie perspective, and when I say indie, I'm not just talking about just the one developer team. I'm talking about even a big team that is just independent from publishers or any other people that have a huge say of what your game should be. Is that so? Sorry, I completely lost my track of what I was talking. But I was saying, as an independent developer, you have this very amazing sort of creative process that you're there. It's where our whole team, for example, DragonPod, we all came up with all the ideas. It doesn't matter if you're an artist, if you're a programmer, whatever you are in a team, you're a member of that team. You have a passion, you're invested in what the game is going to be. But I think talking a little bit about ego is like you can't have that, because ultimately as developers we're all developing games for the players, right? So we have to come up with what we think will be the best ideas and sort of have a bit of instinct as well. It's like try to play loads of other different games and come up, see what works for other people as well. But I think it's so important not try to imitate what other people are doing as well. I think it's super important to have a creative vision, to try to be diverse, to try to be different, to try to bring something unique, to the process, because I think the players will appreciate that. I think we heard so many talks already in these 2 days of people just saying, we're going to the App Store and then suddenly we have 50 clones of the same games. I mean, we need something that is completely diverse.
I think it's not just about volume as well. It's about being self-analytical and critical of your ideas, because a good idea isn't sort of, I've come up with 50 ideas and then I finally stumbled on the good idea. It's taking an idea and whittling it down and going, what can I take away from this to reach the core idea? And also understanding what it will take to make that idea happen. I work at a big studio, so everyone has their individual roles. So if an artist comes up with an idea, if they want a feature to look a particular way in game, we have to break it down into, right, what's the cost to make the art? What's the cost to support that in code? Does it have any design implications? So sometimes we'll work on a project that's more art-led or more design-led, and certain features might be more code or more design or more art-led, but it's working together. Now, if you're that one person on an indie team, then that's having the discussion with yourself. What can I achieve within the time? And if you're working on a bigger indie team or any other bigger team, communication is key to make sure that that idea is realistic and you're not getting carried away. So the earlier on you are within sort of your kind of development of a studio, the more it's important to keep your ideas as small as possible and focus on what makes that idea good, what can I take away from it, and essentially what can I afford to ship without, but I've still got that core idea that will still be good and it will still be a playable, fun game.
I think I would just add to it as well, that it's like, as developers, sometimes we sort of brew our ideas a bit for too long, and we sort of try to iterate internally ourselves, thinking that, oh no, I need to polish this, or oh, I need to expand this idea into something else, and then we put it out there, and actually players don't really care about it. And sometimes are the very, very little things that we hadn't thought about it that players will really value. So I think as developers, I don't know if you have that luxury in a bigger studio, but in a more independent studio, you can sort of release your game, iterate a lot faster to really get that feedback earlier on, because you'd be really, really surprised, and you really can't, talking again about egos or feeling, having really hard feelings about, oh, this is my idea, and it's like, I really want everyone to love it, but it's like, there's no guarantee. Ultimately, we are making games for other people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's something that Dean Carter said some really smart stuff on before about the importance of trusting in your ideas, because for the longest time you might be working on something that's not really playable, or you can't really see it through the eyes of a player, so you don't know how your idea is panning out, you don't know whether your game's coming together, but you need enough trust in them to see it through that period and see a finished game and get it out there, but not so much that you keep working on it indefinitely and trying to whittle it away when you don't actually know what people are looking for from it. There's definitely a difficulty in calling it a day and shipping something and knowing that that's the right thing to do.
And kind of, yeah, I mean, I think we hit a really interesting point here, and I see that a lot of developers, especially developers with maybe a little bit less experience, are really struggling with is, when do you sort of test if a game can actually be fun and successful? Is that something that you try to already test within concept phase, where you sort of discuss the concept, or is it in prototyping or beta? And how do you do that? Only in the studio, or do you have a test panel?
I would just say as early as possible. I think that's simple. Just as early as you can.
I totally agree with that, but I also think the industry has this fixation with ideas that are one core idea that you can just iterate on and make work, whereas actually, like, most games are a huge combination of different ideas that come in at different times. You don't always have that one simple mechanic that's always fun, and you have to see an idea through even at the points where it doesn't quite look like it's fun, because there's almost no basic core game idea that you couldn't polish into something that's playable and enjoyable if you put the work in and had the right ideas and resources. It's about judging those core ideas for their potential to do that, sure, but you also have to see them through once you've started on them.
Yeah, I'd also agree, as early as possible. And there is that fear of you don't want people to see it when it's in that rougher state. But the testing doesn't have to be public testing. You can get friends and family, people that you care about, that will give you honest feedback. And there's different types of testing, and you need to be able to work out what feedback you're almost looking for in a way. So if you take your game to expos or conferences where people can play it, the ability to stand back and watch people play without you inputting and telling them how to play is really valuable. And also noticing behavior, because you know how your game is supposed to play. You might put it on a show floor and suddenly you realize that most people are walking away within 20 seconds. Try and find out from them, what wasn't quite working. You can even have, at the end of a demo, a sort of exit question, and I'd say question, max sort of 3 questions, really easy for them to answer, because most people don't want to spend time telling you how to improve your game unless they have an idea and will chew your ear off over it. But it's finding really easy ways of getting that feedback. Right, why weren't people getting past that first 20 seconds? Was it too difficult? Is it that they sort of looked at it and realized it wasn't a game for them? And also the ability to distinguish between personal player feedback and something constructive. So the worry of having your game on the internet or an early demo is that everyone will tell you exactly what they hated about it, or they think that you should improve. But very rarely will they they'll tell you a lot less when there was something that they really loved. And you also have to filter that information of, that didn't work, I wasn't enjoying this, into what is worth you fixing, what plays into the idea that you want to present. Because you are making a game for others, but you're also the only person, or you're the team that knows what game it is that you want to release. If you take the ideas of the masses, you'll end up with a really weak game that's sort of trying to please everyone. You'll still know your core audience and how to tailor feedback to improving your game.
Yeah, I think trust in your idea there is so important when you get feedback, because it's so easy to see this big list of things you should change and immediately try to act on all of it, when really you need to filter that and use it to influence what you do next. But definitely don't take players' word on exactly what your game should be, because they're just going to try to relate it to games they already like, come up with new mechanics in place of bugs, and you need to have confidence in the vision that you originally had and use it to contribute to that, and not steer it away to something different.
I'll just say something, just one small thing about player feedback. It's like, you have to listen to your players, obviously. Feedback is very, very important. However, you have to interpret what that feedback is, because sometimes players are complaining about specific things in your game, but actually they're talking about a problem that they are having, that you just need to be sort of a bit more clever in trying to find a solution for what they are really complaining about.
All right. Specific question to Ines about No Man's Sky, actually. All of us in the room realize that it's a huge project with, dare I say, more to explore in it than any game before. How did you kind of finalize a project that has a game that basically has no real ending? It's not like a platformer, like, okay, and then the user saves the princess and it's done. I can imagine that you kind of constantly want to, like we just discussed, like add on to it. So when was the call, like, this is it, it's done?
So With No Man's Sky, obviously it's a project with huge scope. And it's not just a project with huge scope in its own right, but it's a project with huge scope for the team that was making it. I mean, we were a tiny team when we still shipped, and we're working on this project that...
How many is that, Tony?
I think we were about 20-ish, maybe, so... I know, it's not comparatively it's not tiny, but for making like a physical-based game and sim shipping on PS4 and PC, and for making the game that we were, it felt like a really small team. So I think most of the problems with that scope are to do with the same problems that anyone has across any game. Like, it's easy to look at No Man's Sky and be like, it's anomalous because it's using procedural generation or because it's this big open world game. But actually the biggest challenges were, for me, came from the fact that we were a really small team working to a deadline trying to ship that game. And the problems with shipping are the same across almost any title. They're that you need to step back and move into a mode where all you're doing is focusing on getting the product out and getting it as good as possible for the people that are going to play it. And that means making those really hard decisions about which bugs are the most significant and which things you can't quite have time to polish off and which things you might address in an update. And where you spend your time every single moment of the day trying to make sure that counts towards the thing that you're working on. And I think that's a small team-specific problem. I don't think that's unique to us necessarily.
Well, going into that small team thing with Modern Dream, I think you guys have quite a... How big is your team, actually?
So for our latest game, we were 4. So that's why when you said 20, it's not tiny.
Because, when I kind of... To prep for this panel and I went through your portfolio, I thought it was interesting to see that you guys did so many different things. There's LA Cops and then there's Dragon Puts. So, is everyone on the team like always on boards to work on a game, or do you specifically like group people into like, okay, these people love this project, so let them work on it? How do you manage that? So
our team sort of changed quite a lot. So not the same people were always there. However, Ollie and I were always sort of the core team. Ollie tends to come up with sort of the ideas and we develop them together, and then we get other people, other creative people on board. I think there's two things. If you have people that really don't like your ideas or don't like the type of game that you're developing, maybe they should go and find another job somewhere else, because they might not be happy, and you need a team that really works together very well to have a successful title, I think. But also, as a developer, I think that any title, no matter what the type of game it is, I think will always bring interesting challenges. So I think it is really down to the individual to be self-motivated, to be, creative, to really want to challenge yourself. It doesn't matter what game you're making, because I think as a developer, what really excites me is the creative process of any game, because any game will bring challenges, any game will be unique. So I think it's really more about how you work together, how great the team is, and not so much about, this is not so much the game that I want to play. It's like in the beginning, if you told me, go and develop a mini golf game, and I'll be like, I don't really like playing mini golf games. However, I actually surprised myself, and the guys on the team, they were like, I didn't think I was going to like this, but we were actually challenging each other and trying to get that on the leaderboard on the top position all the time. It's like, you'll be surprised at what you will find and what you can gain and how you can develop yourself as a developer if you work on something completely different. And that's why I keep saying that diversity is so important, because you can have a diverse team and a team that works very well together. Communication, I think it's important to have a team that is super passionate about the games itself, the games industry, and the process of creating games and creating experiences for other people.
Thanks. I've only published games on mobile, so like for me, the leading platform for me is like very clear. It's always touchscreen. But I think all of you make games for multiple platforms. So how leading is sort of the platform that you choose in your design decisions, and then later if you go cross-platform and you release the game, on something else. For example, first it was console, and then, for example, you go mobile. Sort of how leading is that in the creative decision making?
Our main title that I work on is Total War. It's a PC strategy game, and because of the control that we give players, we keep it on PC, Mac, Linux, so that players can play with a keyboard and mouse. So we know we have the freedom of a keyboard and mouse to allow users to map commands and use a full range of keyboard for interacting. We've explored moving the title onto console and what that would mean, and obviously you want to give the same amount of control to a controller, which is very difficult. So our main focus is make the best experience on PC, and if we want to then take those same titles to another platform, we would then tackle it later with experts on how to do that. So it means our developers can just focus on making the best strategy game for PC desktop machines, essentially. For our console titles, where especially if you're releasing on Xbox One now, I think you also have to get it working on Windows 10. Knowing upfront what your hardware is going to be and knowing any issues with that, I think with more modern consoles developing on PS4 and Switch, it's a lot easier than it used to be to understand the API and work with the hardware. So it's a bit less of an issue if you're sort of working on console and then want to take it onto PC. I've not really worked on mobile games too much, so I don't know the interaction between sort of doing mobile to console or vice versa.
I don't know about mobile either, but I would say, for me at least, as a programmer in a company that is largely programmers, tech is a huge driving force for our creativity. So for No Man's Sky, that's a game that's made up of voxels, and all the terrain and everything around you is generated on the fly. That requires a huge amount of computing power and memory and things. It probably wouldn't have been possible to make a game in a similar way on, say, the previous console generation. The title that we ended up with in terms of gameplay would have ended up really different because the hardware constraints would have been really different. So it's not just down to input devices and things. We have to look at what we can achieve technically and then base a game around that. So it all ties in together, and it means that your role working in tech doesn't really separate you from the creative process at all.
Yeah.
If you wanna.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, when you're designing a game, it can be so different, especially if you're going from mobile to console, for example. You have all the UI decisions, you have, the platform specifications as well that you have to take into consideration, how much you can actually add to your game. And also, it's like when you go to consoles, you suddenly have the TRCs and TCRs that you have to take into consideration as well, and you have to think about how long those things are actually going to take as well, and how that will affect in terms of your development process as well. So, for example, with LA Cops, we always thought that we were going to release the game for PC and also on mobile. We actually had the game working on mobile, and suddenly we had a publisher that came along and they wanted to release on console, and sort of that changed the path of what we were doing. But also, we were 100% happy with how the controls were working, because ultimately it was a shooting game. We had like a 3D isometric view, so it had quite a lot of challenges to actually bring that into mobile. We just didn't want to go to another platform just for the sake of it, just to have like another audience. We wanted to maintain the quality of the experience, no matter which platform you were in.
I think it's good to think about early on whether you want to tackle writing the game to work on multiple platforms to begin with, or whether you want to focus on one platform. And what Elena was saying about publishers is that might influence that decision, because you might have a publisher who's really interested in releasing on a particular platform, or that publisher might have an investment in a particular console. So, I mean, if your publisher is Sony, they're going to want to release on the PlayStation platform. So that might skew your development. But there's also the idea of getting another company to do your ports. If you want to focus on developing on one console and wait to see if that's a success before investing any other time into looking at other platforms, if it is a success and you can get another company who might be more specialized in porting games between platforms, it might be actually worth your time to get another team to go and do the port while you can then focus on your next game. A lot of indie games now do that. I know Rhyme, I think, had a separate team to do their ports. And we've also done it with some of our early Total War games have gone on to tablet, and we're not specialists in it. So we've had another company who understands the touchscreen interaction.
Yeah, true. There's definitely a few like specialized porting companies out there that, for my, going the other way around for mobile, looking into handheld consoles, I kind of looked into that as well, and there's definitely a lot more to it than just the code. Anyway, we have a few more minutes for questions, so I'd like to kind of open it up to the audience to see if there are any questions here. Or not. So to avoid an awkward silence, I was wondering also if any of you have any wonderful anecdotes that you can kind of share. Did one of your ideas sort of was it a typical sort of bar night and someone said, well, that could be a game, or any other wonderful anecdotes you can share?
I don't have any anecdotes. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. I don't have any anecdotes, but I do have a question that I'd be interested to hear from my panelists on. And that's about who we let have ideas and the kind of ideas that we tend to develop. So how do we ensure that we're having that diversity of ideas in the industry and going forward with ones that break from the norm of the kind of games that we already see out there, that let people represent their own backgrounds in games and things like that?
I think it comes down to the team itself. Again, it's like who is going to make the game, who is going to develop, who is going to maintain, and how the team is working together.
No, that was good.
So on Total War, we now develop more than one game at a time. So we have different teams working on Total War products. We also have people will focus on one project at a time, but we also have people who will move between projects. So campaign coders are really specialized in writing our campaign code. They'll work on the project that they need to. And depending on sort of who the leads of the team, who's leading the direction, you can get sort of different dynamics working on different teams, and we're all sort of under the same umbrella. Everyone can get on, we communicate, and we're all focused on making the best game possible. But I think that's good to give different people a chance at sort of like being the leader. And that doesn't mean that only the leader can have the ideas. In terms of ideas, it tends to be relatively flat. So we have a lot of employees, so we do have hierarchy in terms of sort of responsibility and who reports. But anyone can come up with an idea, and it tends to be that sort of like the big sort of story, the big themes of the game will be decided by our design team and our lead designers. But when it filters down into, we have a big game, you play it for hundreds of hours, there are different mechanics within our games, and we'll have sub-teams working on it. And whether you're a graduate or a seasoned senior developer, your idea is just as valuable, but the experience that you've had of years of developing will give you better skills at analyzing your ideas and analyzing other people's ideas and critically analyzing it so that you can come up with the best solution. But if someone who has got a year in the industry comes up with a great idea for a system, we're not going to neglect it. So we tend to work in sort of teams of up to, say, 6 people, which means that you can communicate quite well within that sub-team, and as long as it fits back with that the main core design of the game. So you can't go off and create a subsystem that you're like, this is the best idea, and everyone looks at it in game and goes, 1% of players will ever see this sort of 1% of the time. It still has to work with the overall theme. Anyone working on the game can come up with it. And the idea of failing early with ideas is very good, because if you come up with something, everyone on the team might think it's amazing, but until you've kind of proved that you can technically do it, it's worthless. You don't want to leave your ideas till sort of halfway through development to go, oh, actually, we'd overlooked this technical limitation, which means it's going to take twice as long to develop and we'll run out of time.
I would just say that ideas can come from anywhere. It can come from any people with any background. And if you are lacking on ideas, then try to get outside the games industry, or go to movies, to art galleries. Try to find inspiration on absolutely anything else. The Monument Valley guys yesterday, Dan was saying that they had like this thing with lots of, with the Russian images, or, just go and live different cultures and go and see it from music, from paintings, from TV, from anything, and bring those ideas into the games. I think that's where we'll get diverse, and that's where we'll get rich, because there's so many things that we can learn from masters from the past and from other industries, and create even better experiences. And don't be afraid of failing. Just try them.
Yeah, definitely agree there. Personally, the studios that I work with come from all over the world. So they're from Indonesia, from the US, from Ukraine, Korea, you name it. And I find that it's like all these different people with different backgrounds, and what they were brought up with, what they saw on TV and what they saw all around them. It really kind of shows in the game ideas that they come up with, and it's really refreshing to then kind of try to combine those kind of things. Yeah.
And I think, like you say, everyone's having these ideas all the time, and if you have that diverse team, then you're coming forward with this diverse pool of ideas that can be diverse games. But it's like this panel was talking about, is about making sure that you're choosing those ideas that are diverse, and you're listening to people when they have a different background to the rest of the team, and putting those ideas forward and acting on them, and not just acting on the ones that tie into what people expect from games or what's true to the industry at the moment, I think.
I said, carry on playing games, know what's happening in the industry around you, but also don't be limited to just thinking of things in terms of games. You can get ideas from anywhere, whether that's films, books, going to an art gallery. And don't be afraid to have crazy ideas, as long as you can rein it in and tailor it to your product. If you look at something like Nintendo Labo, who here would have thought, hey, I'll make some cardboard work with my game? But it works, and it works for them. And Nintendo are really good at making fun games, so you know that they're going to make a really good job of it. But if you can come up with a crazy idea that tailors to the product that you want to make, then that will make your game stand out. So in the early stages of coming up with ideas and deciding what you want to make, feel free to go as crazy as possible, and then use that stage of ideas to whittle it down into an actual end product that you will release.
Good. Well, I think it's about time to wrap it up, isn't it?
I was going to try and chuck something else in there, because we talked a lot about the diversity of ideas and this kind of stuff, which is fantastic. But actually, surely one of the things we've got to remember is that this is almost a problem, that we have too many of these ideas. And in some ways, the constraint aspect of production is kind of the core for how you get ideas that propel you forward. And in your experiences, I'd be really interested to know what constraints have been the ones that have really pushed you beyond to getting the really good finished product, that if you hadn't had that constraint, it wouldn't have made it work. I'd be really interested to know if you have any views on that.
So I think that's a tough question. So in work, I would say there are a lot of really interesting constraints which come down to time, the vision of the game that we want to make, and then ideas having to feed into that, the tech that we have. But then outside that, there are a lot of other constraints and barriers that I think can stop us taking the best ideas forward. Like you say, we've got this big pool of ideas, and at that point, it's probably a load of really diverse and interesting ideas. But we can consistently pick ideas from the same people that tie into the same type of games. And I think those are the barriers and constraints that impact a lot of the ideas that we see in the games industry, and the ones that are hardest to fight and most important for us to be trying to combat.
I think we're almost spoiled in a way with hardware limitations now, because back in the PS2 era, when you didn't have a huge amount of memory and processing power, people had to come up with really interesting ways of getting, especially the visuals and audio, to be the quality that they want, but using hardware that couldn't get to that. So you'd have images stored in audio registers and mirrored textures using specific parts of the shader language. And these days, because our hardware can deal with storing so much in memory and on disk, and I think one of the sad things that I find is when I download something from a digital store and it's like gigabytes of data, and you just sort of sit back and go, why wasn't anyone constraining themselves and thinking about the end user? And one of the things that I like is when somebody's looked at how to optimize their game. And performance is a really big optimization that everyone kind of hits right at the end of game because they still need it to run. But even the size of something on disk, we don't really think about it anymore, especially if you've got a mobile game. As long as it'll fit on somebody's mobile phone, we don't tend to think of creative ways of packing it. But constraints can be really good within the development process still. So we always know sort of when we have to ship a game so that we can be making money and can continue to pay everyone on the team and continue making games. And I think the time constraint is the big one of, right, what do we want to do? What is our end goal in terms of visual quality and design quality? When do we stop designing the game and just make it? So in big companies, we have pre-production and then production. So at the end of pre-production, we need to have everything we need to know that everything that we want to make, we can make. So all the features, if we're doing new features that involve new tech, that we have a proof of concept and that we prove that during the production cycle, we can get everything worked and everything polished. And if we find that we can't, we might have to find ingenious ways of working around it. So if you want to do cloth simulations, there's various ways that we can do that. We can put it on the shader, we can do cloth dynamics, we can do any number of physics simulations, we could write it from scratch, we could buy a third-party library. But we are constrained by time and also the amount of money that we want to spend. With indie development, having deadlines is really important, especially if you're just paying yourself, or if you're paying a team as well, because then it's their livelihood on the line as well. So imposing deadlines and being strict with them, those deadlines aren't necessarily a negative of, oh, I wasn't able to do exactly what I wanted, if it means that you find creative ways of having that same visual quality, but coming up with a different way of solving the problem.
I think I'll just quickly say that it's like any team will always have constraints in terms of time, budget, what you're trying to achieve, what are your goals of the company that you're trying to achieve, and also the team, the constraints of the team itself. Is like, can the team actually develop those ideas or not? You know, do you have budget to go and, you know, buy assets from the asset store? Is that enough? Will there be enough quality on that as well? So that's why I think it comes down to that iteration process that we were talking about earlier. So it's like you have to prioritize your ideas. It's like all of them might be good, you know, but you have to prioritize and you have to iterate and get it out there. You won't be able to develop all your ideas. However, you know, you might even find new ideas by releasing your ideas.
And on that note,
We've reached our deadline, haven't we?
yeah, we've
Yes,
exceeded,
our constraint.
I'm afraid. But I want to say thank you very much. I mean, I'm going to chuck one in because I remember when we were working on PlayStation Home, there were some amazing features we were definitely going to do that never made the cut, and that told us a lot in the end. They didn't make it the cut for a reason, because they actually weren't important enough to do. And I think what Ines said earlier, you know, the being careful about the cultural impacts. You know, our comfort zones can actually constrain our concepts. We need to break out from those if we're actually going to make things which are going to capture people's interests, from a wider community. So guys, thank you so much. It was been fantastic. And I'm